session, parties and counsel are present, all members of our hearing or alternates are present, our witnesses back on the witness stand, and you may continue your examination.
I think when we left off, Doctor, we were talking about the number of impacts that you observed to Giani, and you indicated that there were a minimum of 6 impacts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned and discussed earlier was that kids, in fact, have a different form of a skull than adults do. Is that correct? In terms of the bone.
No, we talked about the skin of the kids that was more elastic and pliable.
Okay. And are their skulls a little bit different as well?
Yes, the skull of the kids are more flexible and pliable than an adult skull that's more rigid and stiff.
So is it possible that a child had an impact and we wouldn't see evidence of that in terms of the outside of their skull? Or the exterior of the head, the skin?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. If a child had an impact, is it possible that we wouldn't see evidence of that impact on the outside of the skull?
If a child has an impact on the scalp, you may or may not see any external injuries on the scalp.
Now, with this particular autopsy that you did you find a complete set of hands?
May I look at my report?
That would refresh your recollection.
We did not see a complete set of hands.
Now, in your experience, it's a little bit difficult to ascertain everything that could have potentially happened to these victims because there's no skin tissue.
It is not possible to determine if there are other injuries on the body if it did not hit a bony structure.
Okay. And did you determine a cause and manner of death for Giani?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
Multiple blunt force injuries of the head. That manner of death is homicide.
And did you also do an autopsy on Summer McStay?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Exhibits 361 and 363. And can you tell us what's depicted in these photos?
These 2 photographs depict the bones and the materials that we received on this case.
And were these packaged the same way that you described the other ones were?
Yes.
And in this particular photograph, these 2 photographs that we see side by side, we see a difference in coloration with respect to some of the bones. Can you explain that?
The ones that are white and bleached appearance are the ones that were found on top and on the dirt, and these were interred under the ground, under the dirt.
Now, in this particular autopsy, were there several clumps or masses that we see in the photograph on the right-hand side, which would be 361?
Yes, there are 2 clumps of material that came with the bones.
And showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 773, 774 in the middle, and 775 on the right-hand side. Can you tell us what's depicted in these photographs?
These depicts the clumps that were present at autopsy. One of the big clump has dirt, fabric, clothing, and brown hair. The other clumps had bones, dirt, and some fabric.
Now, in the photograph that's in the middle, Exhibit 774, do you actually see some teeth that are present in that clump?
Yes, you see it next to the ruler on the left-hand side of the photograph.
And then showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 364, can you tell us what's depicted in this photo?
This is the photograph of one of the clumps. You can see the fabric and some other material with dirt together.
Now, do you actually go through that, or does somebody else take those clumps of material and sort them out and figure out what's there?
Dr. Gray did, looking for bones.
Okay. Now, moving on to exhibits or Exhibit 778. Can you tell us what we have depicted here?
So what you have depicted here, the white material is the plastic skull cap, and we're using that as an orientation of where this piece of bone would be on the skull. For orientation, the top of the photograph is the front of the head. So you're looking at the top of the head, and the bone is being laid out. They're both parietal bones. On the left side, you can make out again another curvilinear line, which is a fracture.
And showing you what's been marked as Exhibits 371, which would be on the right-hand side, and 376, which would be on the left-hand side. Can you tell us what's depicted in these photos?
The picture on the right-hand side is the same bone we just looked at. We just removed the skull cap. The picture on the left-hand side is a close-up of this curvilinear fracture.
Okay, so seeing you, it's a little bit hard to see in that particular photograph in 376, but it looks like you're using a laser and pointing to, if you could actually identify the numbers on the top that it's underneath for reference, in terms of the ruler that's on the top.
Okay.
So does that start or end right around the 10 mark on the other side?
Yes.
Okay, and then it looks like if you follow it down, it's between the 35 and 40, is that correct?
Correct.
And there's a circular mark there?
Correct.
Now, showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 366 for identification, can you tell us what this is?
This is a photograph of all the pieces of Summer McStay's skull.
What can you tell us in terms of the level of trauma or impact to Summer McStay's skull based on the amount of pieces that we have here?
Well, based on the number of pieces you have here, it is, examining it, it's multiple blunt force trauma, and that there would be more than one impact to cause this much injury.
Now, I don't know if you know the answer to this, doctor, but when this skull was extracted from the grave, do we know, or do you know, if it was in this many pieces?
I do not know.
So is it possible when you're removing something from a grave, if it's being held in place by the grave that it's in, as you start to excavate it and take it out, is it possible that the fractures will cause it to crumble like this?
The objections, the foundation should establish that she's knowledgeable of excavation.
Overall, she can answer if she has anything.
In general, if the body is in a grave, it's being held together by the dirt. If there are broken bones, it's being held together by the dirt. Once we move that dirt, if the bones are broken in multiple pieces, it will fall apart when you remove it.
Well, is that also, we have layers over our skull, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so if somebody has a particular injury and they're buried and they have skin, is the injury going to, I'm trying to think of the best way to put it, are the bones going to crumble as we begin to deteriorate under the surface?
What do you mean by deteriorate?
Well, I'm trying to think of the best way to ask this. So we have our skull, and then we have different layers, and the final layer would be our skin, correct?
Correct.
And then as we begin to deteriorate, those levels start to go away, essentially, right?
Yes.
And in essence, we're left with the skull, correct?
Correct.
And so if there had been multiple blunt force trauma to the head, and you still had your skin and things like that, that would all hold it in place as well. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Moving on to People's Exhibit 373, can you tell us what's depicted in that photo?
This is a very close-up photo. It's hard for orientation, but this is the frontal bone. You're looking at the right side of the frontal bone. You see here that there are two curvilinear marks on the bone, and this represents two impact sites, two fractures.
for the record, if I can indicate that you are implicating that the ruler on the left-hand side of the photo, it's about 35, is that correct?
Yes.
And then it ends somewhere between 35 or 40 on the ruler on the bottom, is that correct as well?
Correct.
And you're indicating that that actually represents two separate fractures?
Correct.
That is 373. And then moving on to Exhibit 375, can you tell us what we see here?
So this is actually the same bone that we saw the first time on the white skull cap, and it has now been flipped upside down, so you're looking at the back. You actually can see better the half-circle fracture that is on the bone.
And does that represent another impact?
Well, it's the same impact as the first bone that we saw.
Okay. Now, we see all these multiple fractures, and in fact, we saw that Summer McStay's skull was in multiple pieces. Are you able to look at that and determine which fracture or which impact occurred first?
No.
Did you see any evidence of healing to any of those fractures?
No.
I want to ask you, moving on to what's been marked as People's Exhibit 369 and 370. Can you tell us what's depicted here?
On the photograph on the left, you see the entire lower jaw, and you see two areas of broken bone, one on the left angle and the other one on the body of the jaw near the midline. The picture on the left depicts the underside of the left side of the jaw with the broken jaw at the left angle.
Did you observe any evidence of healing to this particular fracture?
No, I did not.
How would you characterize this in terms of ante or perimortem?
Perimortem.
Now, could an injury like this occur without there being any actual blood that comes out on the outside of the skin?
Yes,
How could that occur?
because you will have blood coming out of the skin if there was a laceration, an open wound. With a trauma like this, you're definitely going to have external injuries, but it could be a bruise or an abrasion. It doesn't have to be a laceration.
How about some of the other fractures that we looked at with respect to Summer McStay? Is it possible for those injuries to have occurred without external lacerations?
Based on the number of pieces of skull that are broken, you would expect that there would be some lacerations, but not all of the skull fractures need to have an overlying laceration.
So is it possible that you could incapacitate somebody to a certain degree, because you can't tell us how many of these fractures occurred at one time? Is it possible you could incapacitate somebody to a certain degree without causing a laceration to the skull with blunt force trauma?
Yes.
And are you able to provide any information related to the minimum number of impacts that you believe Summer McStay had?
Yes, based on the number of fractures that we do see on the intact bone, there are a minimum of 6.
Now, there was actually no tissue when you did the autopsy of Summer McStay, is that right?
Correct.
Was there any medical evidence that you observed that could tell you if she was raped?
No.
What type of evidence would you need actually to determine whether or not a rape had occurred in terms of tissue?
In terms of tissue, you want to see if there's trauma to the soft tissue of the vaginal area.
And because there was no tissue attached, you cannot make any medical determination that that occurred. Is that correct?
Correct.
Were you able to determine the cause of death?
Yes.
What was that?
Multiple blunt force injuries to the head.
And were you able to determine the manner of death?
Yes, it's homicide.
Now, you did the final autopsy the following day, is that right? November 15th?
Correct,
And that was for Joseph McStay?
yes.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 378 for identification purposes. Can you tell us what's depicted here?
So in this picture, this is how we received the body and yellow body bag. Also with the body bag came a manila envelope and a brown paper bag that contains dirt and other materials. You see that the body is encased in a dirt cloth extending from the head to the upper thigh. Around the pelvic area, there is a white electrical cord that is tied to a red strap that's knotted in the back. There's also a S-shaped metal hook that's attached to the red strap.
And moving on to Exhibits 380 and 382, can you tell us what we have depicted here?
So the photograph on the left-hand side shows the body being encased in this material. On the neck area, there is a white electrical cord tied in the back.
And the photograph that we're looking at on the left, 380, you're not able to see that cord from the front of that picture, is that correct?
Correct.
And showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 379 on the right-hand side and 385 on the left-hand side. Can you tell us what's depicted here?
On the right-hand side is the brown paper bag that's open up that shows the material inside, which is pieces of fabric. On the left-hand side, the cloth and the red strap and the white cord with the S-shaped hook was removed from the body.
So were there also clumps or masses that were included with the body of Joseph McStay?
Yes,
And did you do x-rays on Mr. McStay?
yes I did.
And was there anything significant as a result of the x-rays?
No,
Now, were you able to determine if there was any sort of trauma to Joseph McStay?
yes I did.
And showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 384 for identification purposes, can you tell us what this is?
This is a close-up picture of the left chest area. You can see that the fabric is still on the body. And this is actually happening the outer left third rib. You see a jagged line going up towards the tip of the rib, and that is a fracture site.
And how or what level of force would be required to cause a rib like that to fracture?
It could be due to an object impacting the body. It could be due to also if there was impact to the front, because if you think about the rib cage, the rib will break wherever it bends out. So when you're compressing in the front, the rib on the side will bend outward, causing a fracture. Those are the two possibilities.
And can you characterize the fracture of this rib, whether it's antemortem, postmortem, perimortem?
It is perimortem.
And again, that means you didn't see any evidence of healing, correct?
Correct.
Now moving on to exhibits 558 on the left and 393 on the right. Can you tell us what's depicted in his photos?
This is a picture of the front of the skull, and the picture on the left is with the hair and some fabric still intact, and it is removed in the picture of the right-hand side.
And do you remove that then to examine the skull in order to determine if there's any injuries?
Dr. Gray removed it to examine the skull, yes.
Showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 559. And 397. 397 being on the right. Can you tell us what's depicted in these photos?
So you're looking at the left backside of the head. The picture on the left is the one that still has the hair and dirt attached. The one on the right, you see a hole in the left backside of the head. And to confirm that that's due to an impact, you see that there is a fracture line, a linear fracture going upward towards the front. You also see a triangular shaped broken bone still attached to the skull.
And moving on to People's Exhibit 561, which would be the photo on the left, and 396, which is the photo on the right. Can you tell us what's depicted here?
What's depicted here is now the top of the head, but you can see both sides, the right and left side. Here you see that you have, again, the triangular-shaped broken bone that we saw earlier. On the other side, we see what is called a round or oval depressed fracture. And just as the name implies, the shape of it, and that the bone was depressed into the skull.
And moving on to People's Exhibits 560, which is on the left, and 399, which is on the right. Can you tell us what's depicted here?
We're now looking at the right side of the skull. The picture on the left still has the hair and fabric attached. The picture on the right has been removed. In this picture, you see two fracture sites. One of them is on the right back side of the head, which we saw earlier, the round depressed fracture. The other one is near the right cheekbone. You see a space between these two bones, and that's another fracture site.
Now, in looking at this particular picture, we see in the picture on the left, which is 560, that you can't actually see the impact or the fracture that you showed us in Exhibit 399. Is that correct? The round one? The circular one at the top?
This one?
Yes, ma'am. Is that covered by the actual hair that's on Mr. McStay's head?
Yes.
Taking a little bit of a closer look at that Exhibit 395, was there anything distinct about this particular fracture?
Can you be specific about distinct?
Sure. Was there anything about the pattern of this fracture that you observed?
Well, every fracture has different patterns. So this one, the pattern is that it is oval to round, and it's depressed.
What's the significance of a depressed fracture?
There's really no significance to the depressed fracture itself.
Okay. Now going back to Exhibit 395, 390, too many. .393 or 397. Can you tell us, this is the fracture you had discussed with us previously, is that correct?
Yes.
And you indicated that the lines off of the top of it shows the impact there, correct?
Correct.
Now showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 777, can you identify this for us?
These are pieces of the skull that came from that open and the hole.
Jackson. She's not feeling well. She needs to go to the restroom.
Okay, we'll take a early break, about 10 minutes. All right, the clerk reflect we are back in session. Parties and counsel are present. Feeling all right?
Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. And if at any time anyone needs a break for any reason, just speak up, let me know, hey, we need a break, and we'll take a break, okay? So you may resume your examination.
Thank you. Okay, it's vacant. Okay. So when we left off, we were talking about all of the little pieces that are depicted in Exhibit 777. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you indicated, or I believe that you testified, that those were the pieces of the skull in the previous exhibit. the missing pieces in this exhibit, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, again, we talked a little bit earlier about the fact that if your skin is intact and things like that, that if you have a fracture of your skull, it would be held intact. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so would that be the same with respect to this fracture?
Well, if your skin is intact, yes, it will be held, these fractures will be held together by the cell.
Okay. Now, were you able to tell anything about the minimum? Actually, I'm going to move on to the next exhibit, which is Exhibit 398. Are you able to see that clearly enough?
Yes, I can.
I can always bring the exhibit to you if you want.
I can see it on the TV screen.
Okay, and is there anything significant about this particular photograph?
So in this photograph, you see the top of the head. On the top right-hand corner, you see the circular depressed fracture that we talked about before. On the bottom right-hand corner is where there was that big open hole on the left back side of the head with a fracture radiating outward to the front of the skull.
And then moving on to People's Exhibit 400, can you tell us the significance of this photograph?
So we now have turned the skull upside down. You're looking at the base of it, and you see this big hole again that we saw earlier on the left back side. The impact that caused this fracture also caused a fracture radiating to the left base of the skull and one going up towards the upper palate of the mouth.
Are you able to tell us approximately how many minimum impacts there were to Mr. McStay's skull?
Yes, there were a minimum of 4.
Now, I want to be clear about something because we talked a lot about different injuries that can happen to the head. And if I understood you correctly, you indicated that there could be a contusion, there could be an abrasion, or there could be a laceration. Is that correct?
On the scalp,
On the
correct.
scalp, okay. And the only one that we would see bleeding for on the outside or exterior of the head would be if there's a laceration. Is that right?
Correct.
And because we don't have any tissue here, you're not able to tell us whether or not there was a laceration. Is that correct?
On the adults, based on the injuries on the skull, I would expect that there would be lacerations, but I wouldn't just say how many lacerations.
Okay. Is it possible to incapacitate somebody or render them unconscious with any one of those blows that you observed to the head without causing a laceration?
Yes.
And again, you can't tell us if all of these particular injuries to the head occurred at the exact same time, can you?
No, I cannot.
And moving on to what's been marked as People's Exhibit 388 on the right and 390 on the left. Can you tell us what's depicted in these photographs?
These pictures depicts the remainder of the inventory of the bones that were found.
And these would be after they were removed from that yellow body bag we had observed. Is that correct?
Correct. And the white bones were put in a separate box that were assigned to individual cases by Dr. Gray.
And did you find a complete set of hands that belonged to Joseph McStay?
May I look at my report?
If it would refresh your recollection.
No, there was no complete set of hands.
And showing you what's been marked as People's Exhibit 391 on the left and 392 on the right, can you tell us what's depicted in these photos?
In both of those photographs, you are looking at the bones of the lower leg, of the right leg. You see the fibula and the tibia. The tibia has a fracture on the backside.
Could this type of a tibia, or this type of a fracture to the tibia, impact somebody's ability to walk freely?
This type of, if the person, other leg, doesn't have trauma, the person can move, but they would not put weight on the right leg with the broken bone.
And were you able to determine whether or not this fracture was antemortem, perimortem, or postmortem?
This fracture is perimortem.
Were you able to determine the cause of death?
Yes, the cause of death is multiple blunt force injuries of the head.
And what is the manner of death?
The manner of death is homicide.
Now, during the autopsies, showing you what's been marked as 745 and 745A, let's show you that. Do you recall being presented with this particular item?
Yes.
And was this item significant for you?
Well, it was significant in that it was in one of the graves and it was a possible object that was used to cause these injuries.
He's showing you a couple of different exhibits here. We have exhibit 354, 375, and 395 that you've already testified about. Do you recall seeing these in the exhibits that you previously testified about?
Yes.
The one on the left is from Summer McStay. That's exhibit 354. The one in the center the one in the center is 354, and the one on the right-hand side is exhibit 395, and then the one on the left-hand side is 354. Is there anything significant about the sledgehammer that you have observed with respect to these items, these photographs that we're looking at, and the bones that you observed in the autopsies?
So when you look at these three photographs, we'll take the one in the middle first. On the back left side of the head, you can see a hole on the left back side, and it has a shape of a half circle, and the rest of the skull is missing. If you look at that case alone, you might think, could the object be round or oval? But you can't really say for sure because there's no bone left there. But if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, when you have again, half circle, but the bone is still intact and the fracture, you know that the fracture is that shape, you start to think the object that is used to cause that broken bone has a round or oval shape. And this is emphasized even more on the skull of Mr. Joseph McStay, where the back of the head, it's not so much that it's depressed, but it's the shape of the fracture that tells you what kind of weapon that could be used. Now, there's no way to tell definitively the exact weapon, but you could rule in or rule out weapons that may have been used. Obviously, it's not like a rod, because a rod would not leave a round or a half circle pattern on the bone. So knowing about the sledgehammer in the grave and the characteristics of some of the fractures, I could say that the sledgehammer is a possible weapon that was used.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Good afternoon, Doctor.
Good afternoon.
So let's talk about the head. Isn't it true 20% of all the blood vessels in the body are in the head?
It is true that 20% of the blood volume of the body goes to the head.
And how about blood vessels? How many blood vessels, or what concentration of blood vessels do you have on the scalp or in the head?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Is it a dense composition of blood vessels in the scalp and in the head?
Yes.
If any part of the body is going to bleed from any kind of injury, what part of the body is most likely to bleed?
Any part of the body that have blood vessels would bleed.
Would you say that the head is the most susceptible to blood injuries, like lacerations in any part of your body?
Yes, because of the underlying skull.
And lacerations, as you said, can be a cut, correct, in the skin?
A laceration is an open wound. It looks like a cut from the outside, but when you open the wound up, you could see that there's still tissue bridging the two sides, so you know it's a blunt force trauma.
It can also be a tear in the skin, correct?
Correct.
So if you have a blunt force object, like a 745, look at that. It's identified as a 3-pound sledgehammer. Steel head, fiberglass handle. I want you to take that into your hand, if you could please, so you get an understanding of its weight. Now, if you were to take that hammer and hit me in the back of the head, is it likely I'd probably bleed if you hit me hard enough to cause a fracture?
Yes.
Now, I'm going to show you the previously marked exhibit 779. What this is a diagram of a head, and this is labeled for Joseph McStay.
Can you see that?
When you do an autopsy and you write a report, correct?
Correct.
And standard what you do when you have an autopsy is you will make diagrams of injuries on a full body diagram, correct?
On the first body, correct.
And now also, could you do a likewise with a diagram of the head?
On the first body, yes.
Okay, I'm just going to leave you 2 color pens here, and when I ask you to do something, you can do it. I'm going to start with Joseph McStay. You said the cause of death is multiple blunt force trauma to the head, correct?
Correct.
And it was a minimum of 4 impacts.
Yes.
With the red pen, can you put a 1, 2, 3, and 4 on that diagram on anywhere you would expect that, or you can find that impact based on your autopsy?
I will need to look, since there are a lot of photographs for all these cases, I will need to look at the pictures of the autopsy to put it onto this diagram.
Understood. I will bring you exhibits 781, 782, 783. 777. Here are all the photographs I saw you guys talked about in one way, shape, or another. And you can use them as you see necessary.
And you want me to mark 1, 2, 4? 1 through 4?
1, 2, 3, and 4. Since there's 4, we'll make sure we have the count. And just for the record's clear, these are not necessarily in the order of impact, correct?
Correct.
And so for the record, you're drawing a line and then putting a number at the end. Could you put a circle where at the end of the line that you think is the impact area? So just so it's clear. And you can put whatever size you think is necessary based on the size. Let's just assume the sledgehammer is the impact object. I think we all pretty much agree the tool marks say this is what caused those injuries. You want to make it that size.
Now the circle of the impact is an estimation since the diagram is smaller.
Of course. Is there any on the back that you can see those same impacts? Just so we get a reference of where they would be on the skull. Since you're the one with the medical degree. Now with that same pictures,
can you take the blue pin, and show where all the fractures are that you identified on Joseph McStay, just so if they look at the jury looks at the exhibits later, or we're trying to look at this later, we know where things are. And again, they don't have to be perfect, but to the best of your ability. And I'm thinking fracture lines and anything else that you saw.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And I will turn it down to the chair. I'll publish this for the jury, which is again Exhibit 779. Now, just so if you can explain to the jury what you did, just so I know the red is supposed to designate impact zones, blue are supposed to represent the fractures that you see, but can you explain to the jury however you wish with the laser pointer so they understand what's there?
So some of the areas there are both red and blue ink because if you look at the right side of the head, there was a fracture near the right cheekbone and the circular depressed fracture. So they're both impact and broken bones. The one on the back left side of the head is the one where there's a open defect with a fracture line radiating up towards the front, and then another triangular shape of broken skull still attached to this open area.
So we'll go to, if we can go to my computer, please. We'll go to Exhibit 780, which I showed you up by the witness stand. This is the one with the ruler that you identified earlier. That's the fracture. Can you describe where that is?
It is between number 25 and 35 on the ruler.
I'll zoom in for it. So that is a fracture caused by blunt force trauma.
Correct.
Would that fracture, that be somewhere here on my cheekbone?
Yes.
So if somebody is hit in the face with a sledgehammer, 3-pound sledgehammer, would you expect that to have a laceration and bleed?
Depends on the amount of force that is used with that sledgehammer.
How hard is that cheekbone right there?
It is not hard, so if, let's say, the same force that was used on this cheekbone is the same force applied to the left back side of the head, the big hole, you would think that this bone here would still not be connected. It would be broken into pieces.
Okay, so this one's still connected.
Yes,
So this one would not necessarily have a laceration.
yes.
But would you be surprised, or let me say this, is it reasonable to think that it probably would have a laceration?
I really can't answer that. There would be some external injuries, but not necessarily a laceration.
Not on that spot, correct?
Yes.
Let's go to 782. That, I believe, is the called the decompression injury, which was above the right ear.
The right back side of the head, correct.
Now, this decompression injury caused multiple line fractures from the decompression, right?
Yes,
And then you actually have bone chips, so it seems like the fracture went all the way through the skull.
correct.
How much force would you expect to have happen for this type of decompression fracture to happen using that 3-pound sledgehammer?
A lot of force.
That amount of force, would you expect to see a laceration on the side of the scalp?
Yes, I would.
Go to 781. This is the, for lack of a better term, hole in the back of his head.
The left back side of the head, yes.
Now this appears to be a little larger in size than the decompression
fracture and also probably larger than the head of the hammer, would you say?
Correct.
Would you expect this to be the most force out of all the strikes to the head?
Yes, and there could be more than 2 impacts. Well, let's say that there should most likely be at least 2 impacts to this area of the head.
At least 2, could be more.
Correct.
So when you say minimum 4, it could be 5, it could be 6, you don't know.
Correct.
To fracture the skull into pieces, like we saw in 777 that the people showed you. To fracture into small pieces like that, that would be significant force.
Yes.
Would you expect to see a laceration or multiple lacerations to the skull?
Yes, I would.
In 783, what part of the skull of Mr. McStay is this?
You're looking at the left side of the skull.
And this is, and I could see a line fracture, is that correct?
Correct. The line fracture starts on the end of the ruler, going up towards number 55.
And is this that long blue line you did on the top of the left side of the diagram?
Yes.
And would that fracture coincide with an impact at another location, or is there a separate impact location that we can see here?
Now that fracture radiates from the hole on the left back side of the head.
So the previous picture,
Correct.
causing that long of a fracture, does that also increase the amount of force needed for those back left side?
Yes.
Now, if somebody suffered these amount of fractures in their skull that likely result in laceration, how much blood would you expect to be around that body at the time of impact?
I wouldn't be able to exactly quantitate how much blood, but it would be noticeable blood. There would be blood around the head and around the body.
And when we say blood, are we talking just a couple of drops, or are we talking it's starting to pool?
It's starting to pool.
This would be something that would be a significant waste amount of blood.
And significant is relative, but definitely there will be a pool of blood.
And if you suffered, whatever order they happen, if you suffer a strike on one of the back left, where you said there was multiple strikes there, first contact, the laceration, how long until that laceration starts to bleed outside of the body?
Once the laceration occurs, the blood will start to bleed.
Instantly.
Yes.
So the second strike would not only hit the body, but it would probably impact the blood that has started to flow.
Objection vague in terms of second strike and where second strike occurred.
Overruled.
Can you repeat the question again?
As we mentioned, you said there was multiple strikes to the back left of the head.
Yes.
If after the first strike it starts bleeding and you strike again, it'll have already started bleeding before the second strike, correct?
Correct.
So you'd be hitting not only the skull, the head, hair, everything that he had on his head, but also you'd be hitting the blood as well.
Yes.
Let's go on to Summer McStay. I'm going to have you do the same thing with another diagram that's labeled Summer. And I'll see if I can grab as many of the exhibits that the people use. Try to write down the ones that you would use.
Why don't we go ahead and take our afternoon recess, and during the recess, you can have her do all the markings and we'll go straight through it.
That'd be
Very good, yes.
We're going to take our afternoon recess this time, about 15 minutes. We're afraid we won't get much of a recess, but again, keep in mind the admonitions previously given to you, not to form or express any opinions about the case, not to discuss the case. We'll see everyone back in about 15 minutes.